strategy, when we talk about strategy or strategic plans in communication, we are just talking about your overall plan for what you want to do. So, it could be something like defeat an amendment by convincing people to vote against it, or get local officials to put money into a certain thing, about from ARP, things like that. Tactics are the actions or the steps that you use to make that happen. So it might be things like a press release, it might be a community gathering, it might be a Q&A session or a petition or a newsletter or different things like that. And then tools, that's simply the things that you use to get the job done. So we're talking about Facebook, Canva, MailChimp, whatever it is, Word, that you're using. That's just the tools. So Susie, the next slide. So when we talk about strategic communications, there are 3 key questions you need to keep in mind, no matter what you're planning, whether it's a small communications plan or a big one. You need to answer these 3 questions before you get started. And the first question is simply, what are you trying to do? So a mistake that a lot of folks make is they start out by just saying, hey, we want to have a press breakfast. And that's not where you need to start. You start by, that's a tactic like we talked about. And it might not be the one that you need to accomplish what you're trying to do. So you need to come up with your goal, and I'm gonna go over, I'm sure some of you have heard of SMART goals, but I'm gonna go over that quickly in a minute. But you need to have a very specific goal. So we're not talking about like, I want world peace. That's a very big, broad statement. Maybe you're just talking about, I want them to put $100,000 into this program here in my community. So the next question that you have to answer is, who can make it happen? Who are the ones in power who can make it happen? Are they voters? Is it the city council? Is it, some business in the area? Like, figure out who it is that can make it happen. Who are the influencers? Think outside of the box and try to keep it specific. So you don't necessarily want to target like all voters. You want to target likely voters who are likely to turn up and vote on the issue in the right way, right? So you've got to figure out how to determine who it is, because that's also going to inform what tactics and tools you're going to use. For example, a phrase I've heard a lot of, if you want to sell to fish, don't use skywriting. Fish don't read. So whatever, whoever you're trying to get to, you need to know that before you start looking at tactics and tools. And Clarissa is going to talk a little bit more about considering different audiences in a bit here. And the third question you have to answer is how you're going to measure it. And that's just so you know if what you're doing makes a difference. So if you aren't able to measure it, you don't know if what you're doing is actually working and whether you need to change course or tactics or whatever. So you make sure that it's attainable and it's measurable. So you don't want to just say, people are going to change their minds about this subject. Say something, you want to have a measurement like, we'll be able to see that 10% more people in Greensboro will vote on this thing, or 100 people are going to sign this petition against tax cuts for the wealthy. So you want to try to keep it as specific as possible and as measurable as possible. So, and I said, next slide, please. I said that I'd talk a little bit about SMART goals, and this is actually Smarty goals. And there's a workshop sheet in the packet that we're going to send you afterwards on how to go through this. But this is just something to help you get to a really specific place on your goal. So strategic, is this something that will actually represent significant progress towards your mission? Measurable, is it actually, are the measures for the goal, measures of success for this goal clear? Does this goal or the tactics that you're using mitigate potential inequities in the outcomes of the process? Does it advance equity and inclusion in the outcomes or process? Is there a deadline for this goal? Do we have the capacity and systems and things? Is it realistic? You want to be ambitious, but you want to be realistic too about what you can accomplish, because you're never going to get 100% of the people to vote for something, right? So just making sure it's something that you can possibly accomplish. So I'm not going to go into these too much. There's a lot of reading you can do about these. And like I said, there's a worksheet that we've included in a packet we're going to give y'all afterwards that goes into this a little bit more. But by doing SMART goals, it'll help you get to a really specific place about and very clear about what you're trying to accomplish. So, all right, next slide, please. And so given all of that, it's really, you don't have to do something complicated to do a communications plan. It can be as simple as a quick table in Word, and it can have as many columns as you need or want. It should have those main three that I talked about. What's the goal, what you're trying to do, who can make it happen, and how are you going to measure it? But you can add, you know, as many columns as you need, and just be very, you know, do something very simple here, and build out, you know, who can make it happen. I put an example here: build political support for using money in ARPA funds for X, Y, and Z by X date. Who can make it happen? Well, in this case, mayor, city council, maybe a secondary audience of voters. And then that helps inform the tactics. Maybe that means speaking at the city council meeting with the lawmaker, fact sheets to give the lawmaker, things like that. The tools, you know, using some, and we'll talk a little bit about Canva, but using something like Canva to create a fact sheet. And then measuring those results is how much money was actually used for that thing that I wanted it used for, or how many proposals at least were introduced by council members to do that, even if they didn't get voted through. Like, did we make progress? So it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be a very simple thing that you do. All right, and then I'm gonna turn it over to Clarissa now to talk about audience.
Thanks, Mel. Let's see, audience. So well, I just wanted to point out something that Mel said, and I put it in the chat about the evaluation piece. I know sometimes I, you know, tend to get wrapped up in the, you know, the campaign and the messaging and all those kind of things. And the measuring and evaluation sometimes falls to the wayside, but that part is so important in terms of being able to just make decisions on what, you know, what tools and tactics that you want to continue to use, especially when folks are like stretched on capacity. I know in the conversation we had earlier about social media, and you all are kind of thinking about, you know, it can be a complex thing to figure out, and the idea that you have to try to do all of the things, being able to evaluate at the end makes it, you know, sometimes really clear, like what things we actually need to be working on, what we can kind of try to grow, and things that we can let go of and not focus on. So I just wanted to highlight that again. But yeah, I want to talk a bit about choosing your audience. Mel put together a really great kind of starting point of how you think about a strategic plan for communications. And the first part was the goal. And then the second part was who can make it happen. And that's essentially the audience. So I like to think about my audience as like a primary and then kind of a secondary. So the primary folks are the people that are gonna, you know, actually make the decision. But we can kind of think about secondary audiences as those folks that can help us sometimes get to our primary audience, those who can kind of amplify our message, or folks that can, you know, influence a primary audience. And I also like to think about what I think you're essentially trying to do is kind of cultivate and create evangelist around a message, because we all are, you know, typically in you know, small shops, you know, stretched for capacity. And so what you want to do is create a group of folks who can amplify your message, who are talking about it, hopefully as passionately as you are. They don't have to be as perfectly eloquent all the time as you desire, but you want folks to be able to have a message that they can repeat and share and connect to. So I think that's ultimately what the kind of the broader thing is. We want to kind of target messages for a primary audience, and then think about, you know, secondary ways to have other people talking about your messaging. And then I would say, so for the primary folks, that you're going to pull that from your strategic comms plan. Be specific. There may be more than one of your primary audience, and you want to research and understand them. And that's where the power mapping that you all did in November, that's where those kind of things come into play. Like, who those people, how are they networked? And then how you access them. Is that directly or indirectly? That goes back to the secondary audience. There are ways that you can access those folks indirectly. I talked about the secondary audience. Also, you'll pull that from your comms plan. These are people who can help spread your message. They're creating awareness, attention on the issue, and then ultimately some sort of action, whether that action is to make the message bigger, or if that action is to be contacting your primary audience. If they're wanting to, getting folks to make phone calls to a legislator or about an issue. So those are folks you want to pay attention to as well. And then the third thing that I, admittedly, sometimes don't think about is thinking about the type of audience, and then differentiating that message accordingly. I think ultimately we want to create like a base message. And then you think about what basically the details that you would, add or delete to that message for recognition, for understanding, and really for repetition. I think that's the biggest thing. Like the message is only as good as how far it can travel, like correctly. We all play that game of telephone. When you're having too many details and those kind of things, messages can get muddy and distorted. So you want to make sure things are understandable, that people connect with them, and that they can repeat them. So think about the details that you're adding or deleting to make that true for the different audiences. I like to think about the audience in like 4 different ways. So like you have a friendly audience. These are probably your secondary audience folks. They already, understand or connect in some way or believe in whatever the message is. So you're really trying to get them to reinforce that message and amplify it. There's the apathetic folks. These are the folks that you're trying to convince. They may have a sense of what the issue is, but you want to convince them of why it should matter to them. There's the folks who are completely unaware. So part of your mission with these type of folks is to educate and make them aware before you can convince them. And then lastly is this audience that's unfriendly. Usually folks talk about hostile, but I didn't want to bring that kind of energy into our meeting. But but let's just say unfriendly. So these are folks, and this is reality, especially in advocacy work. In political work, that you're going to have audiences that are kind of unfriendly to your message. And I think ultimately that's an idea. We're trying to kind of gain their respect and at least an openness to listening to a different perspective and creating a space where people can feel open to change their mind. So your audience may not fit into, all 4 of these categories. They probably won't, but taking some time to think about, where they do fit, and then crafting your messages around that can be really helpful. So next slide, please. All right. And I also want to talk a bit about identifying and incorporating your tone of voice. I think the last session that I came to, we were, talking a little bit about like how we're communicating with folks. And sometimes, this idea of kind of demystifying like how we may approach folks at certain levels of power, and sometimes feeling like we need to adjust who we are and how we communicate to appropriately connect with those folks. And when I talk about differentiating, I'm not talking about kind of changing who you are and what you're trying to communicate. I'm talking about how we detail a message so people can understand and repeat it. But I think taking some time on the front end to kind of understand who your organization is and the kind of the personality of it, the values, the experience, the location. One, I think it gives credibility to your message because you're very firm in what you're, what you're communicating and where that is coming from. The experience, we talk a lot about, what assets our communities are bringing to a conversation. So I think that helps with the confidence of talking to these folks who are in power. So kind of understanding that, and then having a sense of what's generally the impression that you want people to leave with when they interact with you and your message. And when you've taken some time to do that, try to identify some key elements of what you want your tone of voice to be when you're communicating with folks. So we did this work at MDC. We did a whole branding of our website, of our logo. And part of that conversation was really thinking about what we wanted our voice to be. So I put a little kind of snapshot of that. So we wanted to be celebratory. We identify with being in the South. We wanted to kind of uplift the South and really celebrate the things that are great about it. We want folks to think of us as competent. We're innovative. We have knowledge and experience, and generally mostly know what we're talking about. And so we're also empathetic to folks, and then familial in how we communicate via email, via social media. Try not to use a whole lot of jargon, and be able to connect to folks as being part of a community that we're all part of, that we're wanting to uplift, our Southern neighbors. So that's kind of the elements that we thought of, and then kind of pulled that together to talk about a tone of voice. So it's like a mix between your tech savvy cousin and a resourceful friend. We're interested in supporting your dreams, but also want to hold you accountable. And we don't always have all the answers, but we typically can connect you with folks who do. So I think once you kind of get those things down, be confident and authentic in your messaging across those audiences. See, I was trying to think, was there anything else I'm going to add? And I think strive for, consistency with that. Another thing about that kind of thing is your tone of voice. That's also something that can evolve through the life of your organization. So don't necessarily think of it as this, static thing that has to stay that way forever, or even from campaign to campaign. As you all evolve and learn and evaluate, that may change. All right, next slide. Great. So this is the part I want to talk about, the tools. Like Mel said, we're trying to give you all kind of a high level view of things and, what we know has worked. I think this absolutely is something we can dive into deeper. I was listening in the first part of the meeting about how you all were thinking about social media. And so again, I'm happy to kind of like dive into, deeper discussion about that, at another session or, offline. But what I generally want to convey with social media and the tools that we use is it's not necessary to do all of the things, especially with social media. deciding on what things are necessary and really what things are possible with the capacity that you have. So what platforms do you have capacity and expertise, and really where are your people? So those are two things. What are the things that you know you can run, and where are your people? So for us at MDC, our people are mostly on LinkedIn. So I make sure that we post our content frequently on LinkedIn. We also post it on Facebook. We also post on Twitter. We also post on Instagram. But if I have to choose and I only have time, then I'm making sure it gets on LinkedIn. And I prioritize the content that goes on there. And so again, kind of figuring out, where you need to be. The other thing to think about too is to consider where and how you can partner with other folks to amplify your message and reach those primary and secondary audiences. So sometimes you can reach out to, organizations maybe within this group, or folks that have a higher profile than you, or if you're trying to like grow a following on a certain platform, and an organization that you have a relationship with is big on that platform, ask them if they can, share your thing or message, on their page. Social media is like a content monster. So frequently organizations are looking, it's hard to fill up, like a daily or, multiple daily, messaging. And so there are opportunities folks are looking for, like, especially for messages are aligned, like, I'll share this thing that you're having. At MDC, we absolutely are trying to highlight the work of our partners. So thinking about ways that you can work with other groups to use their social media. And I think the big thing too with that kind of stuff is decide on what the priorities are and the frequency. Identify the tools that you want to use, and you need to assign somebody who's going to be responsible for pushing this content out and scheduling it. I can't emphasize enough, like, scheduling content. There's great tools for that. Hootsuite, like if you're going to be committed to doing social media, a content tool is I feel like absolutely crucial to do that, so that you can do it regular. There's nothing worse than, like, stale content is almost worse than no content. Like if you decide to engage in these things and you're not updating them frequently, there's no point in having them, and they actually can kind of be detrimental to the messaging and the campaign if stuff is not updated on a regular basis. Let's see. I remember somebody mentioning a website. Do we need a website? I think generally that's true, but not always. It depends on what the content is and whether you're trying to have some sort of like a dynamic web page or a static page. So a dynamic page is something that is up, it's being, updated regularly. You're putting different news, those kind of things on there. That's great if you have the time and the resources to keep that going and updated. I see folks sometimes have their like Twitter feed on their website, and they literally never tweet. Like the last tweet was like 3 months ago. That's not something that you want to do. The same thing with blogs. Folks were like, yes, we've got to have blogs. We've got to have our blog scroll on the website. They never, blog, or like I said, the last blog is like 3 or 4 months ago. Also not great. So really think about what the messaging is and the campaign, and is a whole site necessary? I think that's also the beauty of social media, is like, if your goal is to have people like interacting with you, and the content that you have is small enough that it can be in a profile or something like that, then maybe you don't need a website. Or if the content that you're trying to share is available somewhere else that you can link to, maybe that's the approach. Or maybe you just need a page and not a site. Like a site is like, can be like, it's like multiple pages and lots of content and a big thing to manage. Maybe you just need a page. There are like, I think Canva does it. I know Adobe Express, you can create like just a web page where you can direct people to, you can make a like, you can link back to that page, and it's just kind of hosted there. And it's pretty easy to manage. And then if you decide that's the route you want to go with the page, why and how are you driving traffic to the site? So if you're not driving anybody to the website, going back to the first question, maybe you don't need a web page, and can we utilize other online resources? Yeah, let's see here. Email list, similar kind of strategy there. Are you trying to like communicate with folks, regularly or frequently? Do they need direct communication? If not, maybe that's not necessary. If you're trying to push out a message similar to social media, are there other organizations that we can use to partner with to amplify our message or to share our message? You already have a strong list and they're communicating regularly. Folks that are putting out newsletters, especially I think probably some of these county organizations, maybe there are our news list that are already out there and accessible, especially for event stuff that you can share that. Always kind of deciding on the content and priorities. Again, identifying the platform and assigning creators, and then scheduling your content with all these things. And I'll keep repeating it. Frequency and setting expectations of when people will hear from you is super important. There's no point in starting a whole list and you send stuff to every 6 months, or it's sporadically. Folks don't know when to expect to hear from you. Too frequently is also an issue. People will unsubscribe, and then things just kind of become part of all of the noise of all of the emails and everything else that comes our way. So being kind of deliberate about when you're communicating with people, if you decide that you want to communicate with them directly in that way. And then on literature, kind of figuring out, is this something that we have to have physically for folks? Is this something that can be digital, maybe a combination? And then thinking about how and where and how often those kind of things will be distributed. I would say generally with literature, less words is better. Less words, more images. Think about how you can utilize video and those kind of things. If it's printed, you want it to be accessible. If folks, you have an expectation that other folks are going to print it out, think about how much color you're using. Does it need to be black and white? People do not have access to, color printing and those kind of things. And of course, again, with the messaging, you want things to be kind of simple and repeatable. All right, next slide. How am I on time, y'all? Do I need to talk faster? That's always a thing for me.
You're great, Clarissa.
Okay. And then lastly, on the events and speakers and things like that, I think with events, they're a great opportunity. They're an opportunity to kind of introduce folks, connect, educate, influence your primary audience, collect support, distribute materials. But just generally when I think about events, event planning and logistics, especially in-person events, it's a big lift and it requires, you know, a lot of detail, capacity, resources, and time. That's less true with the virtual events, but you know, the planning and those kind of things are still involved. And so, again, I would say consider where there are opportunities to participate in events that are already planned, that you understand a primary or a secondary audience may be already participating or present. And then, you know, offer your experience as a panelist or a presenter at that event. Again, I think that power mapping and network mapping comes into play there, thinking about who people are and what those networks are. As somebody who's, you know, event plan and, you know, kind of trying to come up with speakers and panelists for those kind of things, folks are looking for the low-hanging fruit on that. Like if you have experience and to share, you might be a you know, great panelist, or you can recommend people in your organization to be a part of these events. I think you want to think about the type of event that you're having, whether that's like a, you know, a conference, a symposium, like a panel discussion, town hall, webinar, and how those things are connecting or influencing your primary and your audiences. Are these things like invite only? Are they public events? And again, there are opportunities for you to be part of another event. And the last piece of kind of speakers, you want to identify speakers that are best aligned with the event goal, whether that's to educate or amplify, and then the audience type. A thing I've been thinking about recently, if you're trying to get, you know, media presence, is consider asking, you know, media folks to be moderators and hosts. Typically when they do that, then they'll give a shout out on, you know, on the news. Of course, you want to get permission to repurpose and reuse content, to record content that is then drives what you can put on social media and out in these other places. We can talk some about the Facebook Live and, you know, kind of live streaming, and, you know, how you decide if that's important for you. And then lastly, I just want to add, like, strong facilitation and moderation is super important. That really, you know, can drive, you know, how well an event goes, how the conversation goes. I always give shouts out to the World Forward team on their facilitation skills and the kind of emphasis on that. I think it makes a huge difference. So you want to keep that in mind, who's moderating how these conversations are being facilitated. So, and maybe that's something to kind of think about initially. And I think that's it. The next one, I think I'm turning over back to Mel.
Yes, thank you. So you just heard Clarissa talk a lot about how all of these kind of tactics and things are important. It's important to have those relationships built and to find folks, to know people in your community and know who can help. And it's no different with the media. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about some media tactics and how you make the most of the media. So why go to the media? Obviously trying to reach a broader audience. Sometimes it's you're trying to influence decision makers through the media outlets they care about. Sometimes you're trying to pressure lawmakers or other well-known decision makers about what they're deciding with some media attention. And sometimes it can be an opportunity to get information out in your own words through an interview, an op-ed, or letters to the editor. So, but one thing, next slide, please, to think about is don't stick to traditional definitions of the media. It's a lot different out there, even than it used to be 10 years ago. It's changed even in the 7 years that I've been out of the media. There's all kinds of different places now to access things where people are getting information from. Your traditional ones like newspapers, the dailies, the weeklies, the indies, your TV news, radio, podcasts. You have your web only shows now, blogs, social media. There's some people who just share information on social media. There's some nonprofit media firms popping up in North Carolina, Carolina Public Press and North Carolina Policy Watch are two of them that I'm aware of. There's a lot of local and state level newsletters out there now that people are getting just in their inboxes. So things like the Assembly, there's a lot of them on Substack. There may be ones that are just locally based. I know we have some Greensboro only ones here where I'm at. And then trade or targeted publications are a good one to keep in mind too, that may not feel like they have as much of an audience to you, but sometimes it's a better quality audience because it's very targeted. For example, whenever we're trying to influence something that matters to the business community, we look at the Business Journal and trying to do stuff with them. There's things like NC Health News. There's a lot of different things in North Carolina that are very narrowly focused on one thing. So keeping in mind like all of the different things that could be considered the media nowadays. And the good news is if you get into one decent sized outlet anymore, you have a better chance of being picked up elsewhere. I know that a lot of traditional media, for example, look to places like Policy Watch for news ideas because they just don't have the staff and time anymore for these investigative pieces or finding the news. So when it appears in one place, suddenly all the other journalists are like, ooh, easy story idea. So, but really, it's really just knowing about where your audience is at. It's going back to that, knowing your community, knowing where people are, what people are paying attention to, talking to the people around you and saying, hey, where do you get your news from? Finding out if there's things that you don't know about that are influencing a lot of folks. And that goes back again to, if you don't have the audience already yourself, if you don't have an active Twitter or Facebook or things like that with a big audience, partnering with, like Clarissa's saying, partnering with folks who do have that audience, getting on somebody's podcast, getting on somebody's live stream who has a bigger audience, it could be a better use of your resources and things. So, so time is getting tight. Okay, so next slide. So building relationships with those folks in the media. So the best time to do that is to do it before you need somebody. So looking for stories and things that are popping up in the news that have stuff in common with your cause, or seem like they might be written by somebody who has an interest in something you might have to say. So see who put them together, follow them on Twitter, send them, get to know them authentically though. Like, don't just like, just send an email as like sort of a, just get to know them authentically. So follow them, interact with them on social media, send them a personal note when there's an article in the paper that they do that you like. So that that they become aware of you. And I remember people who would send me nice notes because we so often got angry emails and letters from folks. So and then the number one tip I can give you is to be accurate, be on time. Like if a journalist tells you they have a deadline and they need a quote by X time, do it, and be responsive quickly. Like those things will get you so far with journalists. And then nowadays with journalists and other folks who are creating content on media sites, make their jobs easy. There's so many layoffs and so few journalists now that they don't have time to do their jobs as well as they'd like to. So the more that you can provide all of the information they need, facts, access to sources, photo ops, photos, videos, things like that, that's going to get you very far with a lot of journalists who are looking to fill up space sometimes. When I was doing things like calendar listings of the paper, the bands who got their photos in the paper were the ones who made their high-res photos easily available on their website. I didn't have to contact anybody. I could just download it. Make your content and your sources and your resources and things easily available. Make it easy. And then know your audience. Again, know the journalists. Like I know who the journalists are in the state who are data nerds. And so that whenever we have a new data tool that we put out, they get a personal email from one of us saying, hey, we thought you might be interested in this. And so like knowing what their interests are as well. can be really helpful. So resources and templates. So we have put together a Google Drive with several resources and things for you to learn more about these things that we've been talking about. There are some templates, there are some samples of things like press releases and emails to journalists. One thing that I know a lot of folks I do these kind of things with really find helpful is I put in my guide to free and cheap resources for nonprofits. So it's a listing of basically a lot of free and cheap not resources, like where to get photos, where to get videos, where you can canva.com if you're not already using it to create flyers and social media images and PowerPoint, whatever. Like it creates everything and it's mostly free and it's amazing. Especially if you don't have a lot of design skills already, they have so many templates that you can use. So this list is in there as well. And there's several other things. And like I said, we would love to hear from you about any of these things that we would like to do a little bit more of a deeper dive on in a future session. So with that, I will turn it back over.